Then I'll move around after. All right. Hope everybody had a good weekend. Thank you guys for being here. Keep up the good work. Couple things to start off with. The concept of open and closed chain. We are going to define it very loosely, and then we expand on it in biomechanics with some different options and linear and angular and that kind of stuff. To keep it simple, we have kinetic chains that you've probably heard about in sport or clinic, like the posterior chain, the anterior chain, the link of muscles that might assist in functional daily activities or exercises or movements. So with appendicular motion, the term chain is really about fixing the door versus the wall. Fixing, I think last week I used the analogy of running on the ground or running on the treadmill. Layman's terms, fixing the environment so that these illusions can kind of take place. Okay? So open chain is just when the smaller part, which are typically our hands and our feet, because think about it, as we work our way from our thorax, things get smaller and smaller and smaller, just like when you pop in a towel, the tip is the thing that's moving the fastest. Just like when you work yourself up a building, they get less and less and less dense as you work your way up. The bottom part has to be the densest, right? As you work your way up, it gets a snake. As you work its way down, proximal to distal, the tail gets thinner and thinner and thinner. So it's the same for our appendages. Our arm is a little denser, more dense than as we work our way to the tips. Okay? Makes sense. If I'm going to throw something like popping a towel, I need the last part to be this kind of the smallest. So closed chain typically means when our distal segments aren't free to whip, aren't free to move. They are fixed, they are closed on our environment. Usually that could mean the floor, like if you're doing push-ups with your hands. It could be a wall if you're doing wall push-ups. It could be your feet in contact or connected with the ground, where your feet aren't allowed to move like they would be off the ground. So for our class, you need to know closed chain is when your distal segments are connected with the ground, and open chain is when they're off the ground. Okay? Now, in terms of joint motion, it has zero to do with naming joint motions. That's always been a point of confusion that I'm trying to work through being a better teacher. So in other words, what we don't say is left ankle open chain plantar flexion. Left ankle open chain plantar flexion. Like, the chain has nothing to do with it. The chain and understanding the chains can help us see why this is the same as this, even though it might look different. But we don't incorporate it into the name of the joint motion. Okay? So, ankle joint. Got to know the bones that make up the ankle joint, guys. You got to know the bones that make up all the joints that I'm going to hold you accountable for in this class. Remember, the ankle, the true ankle, is the wheel. This is what allows our car to go forward and back. That's literally the wheel. And the way our cars work, it's not a continuous rotation. It's a rotate, recock, rotate. It's bipedal spin. Okay? So as you in your gait cycle, as you toe off to plantar flex, you have to reset so that you can plantar flex again. So you're going to dorsiflex. You're going to plantar flex as you transition from heel strike to foot flat. You don't need to know this stuff on this test, but I'm explaining why this is useful. And then you're going to plantar flex when you toe off, and then you're going to recock the whole thing again. It's like an analogy in the Wild West, when they had 6 shooters, right? And you had a purpose, bang, and then you had to recock it so that it could bang again. So it's the same thing. You're firing your muscles, like firing the 6-shooter. You're firing the bullets and your muscles' energy, and then you got to recock it so that you can fire again. So that's happening here. Open chain, it's going to look like this. Right ankle plantar, right ankle dorsi. Looks like it's moving, and it is. Left ankle plantar, left ankle dorsi. Bilateral plantar, bilateral dorsi. This looks very silly. In the video, I'm trying to get my feet could see. Right ankle plantar, right ankle dorsi, left ankle plantar, left ankle dorsi, bilateral ankle plantar, bilateral ankle dorsi. In terms of closed chain, plantar and dorsi is going to look like this. Let's see if I can get my feet straight. Bilateral ankle dorsi, bilateral ankle plantar, and then if I go up on my toes, that's just more bilateral ankle plantar, just more plantar. So plantar from, dorsi to, dorsi from, plantar to, plantar from. You say that works? Yes, please.
So that example was the example of closed chain because
The distal, here's another way to look at it. In closed chain, proximal bones move about distal bones. And in open chain, distal bones move about proximal bones. It's just different forms of saying the same thing. So open chain, distal moves about proximal, and in closed, proximal moves about distal. But it's the same movements, it's the same changes. Open chain, door moves about wall. Closed chain, wall moves about door. So it looks different.
So open chain is supposed to be like your foot or whatever, not on the ground.
Free move.
And when you say to and from, like, are you talking about anatomically?
Always.
Okay.
Always, just like in the first test. Just like in the first test. And great questions, because I didn't say that. So sometimes I infer it, but I shouldn't assume as well. From anatomy, right? Any questions? You guys by now should know why we do not have ankle joint extension. And I'm telling you, I play poker with my cards facing out. I'm telling you, I'm going to ask you something about ankle joint extension. I'm telling you that. And the ones that get it wrong either don't come to class or don't watch the videos or maybe a combination of both. I'm telling you that I'm going to ask you a question about something to do with ankle joint extension. And I'm trying to explain why we don't have it. We have 2 different forms of getting in the feet. Okay? From last class, this is how important this is. There is no high ankle. That's just an ankle. Okay? Our ankle is this. It is our wheel. Underneath the ankle, just like underneath the water, submarine lives under the water, the subtalar or subtalus joint is where the calcaneus can shift or glide. Okay? Let's see if there's my slinky. So the subtalar and transverse tarsals, we know these are the tarsal bones, the little short bones. So underneath the talus, you got this big calcaneus, a heel bone, And then you have these transverse tarsal bones that can all shift and glide. And technically, there is a name between every tarsal bone and every tarsal bone it shifts around. That's a lot of flippin' names. Calcaneonavicular, talonavicular, like every bone that shifts about something else has a bunch of names. So for the sake of simplicity, we're just going to say the transverse tarsal bones, kind of how they shift and glide on each other. Okay? God, so many cool biomechanical things here. But the essence of the subtalar joint is so that you have balance. So you have your wheels that are for locomotion, and the shift and the glide of the subtalars is to kind of help you stay balanced. Some other things too, but the so what is if you're doing a stork stand and trying to balance, you notice very few sways are front and back sways. A lot of the sways are side to side sways. Right? Because that's this kind of being like a teeter-totter trying to balance. You know how we have those levels and they have like the little bubble? And if you go one way, the bubble goes that way. You gotta, and you're trying to constantly keep it. Another thing that the transverse tarsals and that kind of shifty gliding thing helps with, maybe not so much now, but definitely our ancestors, is uneven surfaces. Like think about, now we try to have even surfaces for a number of reasons, but if you're walking in the woods, or heck, even with shoes, hills, mountains. I know we don't have that here, but having your foot's ability for one part to shift this way and this part to shift that way and kind of go with the flow, it's almost kind of like having shocks in a car to kind of contour, not all at the same time, but one roll this way, the other roll that way in order to keep things. So very shifty, very useful. In terms of motion, we call it inversion and eversion. However, what I do want to introduce to you guys that I haven't in the past, something new that I think will help us understand, is when we are in open chain, the term inversion and eversion is used the most. Like if you're doing TheraBand exercises, you may say, do some inversion stuff or eversion stuff. However, in closed chain, the term pronation and supination is used a lot. And so there's going to be times where I'm going to teach you that words are synonymous because they're used so often in commonplace. It's beneficial for you to know that those are the same thing, right? So what does supine mean in terms of a whole body? Like if somebody is lying or laying supine, don't think radial ulnar joint, just think like your whole body is supine. Yeah, laying on your back, right? Kind of eyes forward. And if you're laying on your tummy or face down, what do we call that? Prone and supine. So pronation and supination is literally the act of going supine or the act of going prone. Eyes up, eyes down. So how I want you to think about this for the subtalar joint. Now, once again, from last week, keep in mind, this talus is locked in to that distal tibia and fibula. You do not want that bone to do this. What do we call that in science? A bad day, right? You want to keep it, you want to keep those wheels fixed to only do this. You don't want the wheels wobbling all over the place. Does that make sense? Okay. In anatomical position, the dorsum of my hand was in the back, right? And the ventral part or the palm part was in the front. And I put some little eyes right here. So we're going to do the same thing. This would be the dorsum of my foot, like the dorsal fin, the top part of my foot. That's why dorsiflexion. And then this would be the plantar surface, or like the palm of my foot, plantar flexion. Now, if you're like, well, wouldn't, in anatomical, if this is face forward, wouldn't this kind of be face forward? I'd be like, yeah, that'd be kind of an equivalent. And then we also know that we kind of have an arch in our foot, right? And the arch is there to help dissipate force. Arches in the Roman times, they figured out the arch because you could dissipate a lot of force. They could hold a lot of stuff, and it's no different with our arches. We're able to dissipate a bunch of ground reaction forces. Okay. So what I'd like for you to think about is, instead of face down, because of the arch, our person is kind of like laying on his side. Does that make sense? The foot is not totally flat, is what I'm trying to get to. Like when we're in anatomical position at our wrist, and the ankle and subtalar joint is like our lower extremities version of the wrist. It's not the wrist, but it's our equivalency down here. This isn't flat on the ground. It's kind of curved. It's like a dog doing like this and letting you scratch his belly. Right? So think about this, how functional. The act of going prone is pronation. And the act of going supine is supination. So far, so bad. The act of going prone, pronation, the act of going supine is supination, and this is going to hold true when we do the radial ulnar joint as well. So if I am here, and I'm closed chain, and I'm flat-footed, I'm going to have more pronation. I'm going to be more pronated. The act of my subtalar joint going more flat, more face down. Does that make sense? Or if someone has a real high arch, they could be more, we call it pes cavus and pes planus, but that's just like, it's just more flat or more curved. More face down when you're flat and more face up when you're arched, when you're supine. So a pronated foot or a supinated foot or boy, you pronate when you walk. Like all that stuff is just kind of a closed chain concept for when you go more face down or you go more face up. Now, the motion equivalency, this is where it can get a little tricky just because of the illusions we talk about so much. The motion equivalency. Think about trying to change direction on a basketball court or during a drill, and you're running one way, and then you need to change direction and go back the other way. Our bodies want to maintain as much interlock, surface area with the ground as possible, because we're not ice skaters that have a blade, and when we change direction, we shoot ice all the way, and we actually slide while we stop. We need as much surface area on the ground as possible to be efficient to change our direction. So if our subtalar joint wouldn't invert, we'd have to be like an ice skater right here. So look at this. We invert to allow the bottom of our foot to stay where we have most optimal interlock to the ground. So in other words, here, if I'm trying to change direction, here is the exact same as here. So far, so bad. So I'm inverted this way. Coming back up, left subtalar eversion, going down, subtalar joint inversion. Now, in terms of the pronation, supination, very similar. I start here, let's say I have a high arching foot, and I do this. That pronation coincides with eversion, and the supination coincides with inversion. In fact, you therapists one day are going to help people with their arches, not just by giving them arch supports or by having surgeries. You're going to do these little exercises where you're going to specifically try to contract a muscle called the tibialis posterior, which kind of runs along that arch and kind of helps to create that arch. It pulls in a direction of a supination type pull, but in terms of the subtalar and transverse dorsal joints, it's the same as an inversion pull. It just looks different because this looks a lot different than this. And when we're closed chain, we don't get that extra contribution of those metatarsals. Remember the ones that I said are kind of like, they're in the middle, right? They help to kind of, so when the fingers or the toes have to stay put, we kind of have to do everything with the metatarsals, and we don't get that extra little help from these little shifty components right there. So it looks a little different. Okay? Bilateral. Let's see if I can get this on the video. Bilateral subtalar and transverse dorsal joints inversion. Bilateral subtalar and transverse dorsal joints eversion. This might seem like the same thing. Hey, they're both pointing to my left, and now they're both pointing towards the middle, and now they're both pointing to my right. Your instinct wants to go that route because you are used to using global references. But both of these movements brought the medial part of my foot closer to the medial part of my shin. It's a mirror effect. If I had a mirror here and I did that, wouldn't the other side do that as well? Absolutely it would. They are mirrors of each other. That's how this works. Right subtalar joint inversion, right subtalar joint eversion. Left subtalar joint eversion, left subtalar joint inversion. I'm going to use subtalar as a shortened version of subtalar and transverse dorsal joints. Subtalar, it's almost like having a captain. The subtalar joint would be like, I'm going to represent all these other articulations in the dorsal bone area. Okay. Any questions about ankle, subtalar before I start on the knee? Yes, ma'am.
When you said like supination versus pronation, which one do you prefer? Like inversions also?
I'm going to use inversion and eversion the most.
Okay.
However, for your clinical development, I want you to know that inversion is going to be used synonymously with supination, and eversion is going to be used synonymously with pronation. So like someone who's flat-footed, they would say they're pronated. They'll use terms like that. But that's the same as a closed chain everted or eversion. Same thing. Cool? All good. Okay, we're good? All right. The knee. I'm going to get right to the hard stuff. The knee is a modified hinge joint. It's a modified hinge. See if I can think of a sports analogy. Like when I was playing basketball, now positions are kind of evolved from back when I was playing, but like I was considered like a swing guard. I could play two as a shooting guard, but I could also swing and play like small forward. Like it was kind of a modified position. And so our knee is mostly hinged, kind of like our elbows. But goodness gracious, can it do something unique that the elbow cannot do? This is not happening at the same place as this. I've said it a couple times. We'll go into more depth. This is my forearm bones literally wrapping and unwrapping itself, and this is literally my ulna moving about my humerus in a hinge type fashion. Okay? Our knee is mostly hinged, made up of the femur, the distal femur. You see these little condyles, the articulating surfaces, and the tibia. Now, the fibula lives in the apartment complex, but it's not in the same apartment. Okay? This is where the action is at. Femur, distal femur, proximal tibia. You'll hear things like medial tibial plateau and lateral tibial plateau. You never hear fibula plateau because the fibula is not articulating with the white hyaline of the femur. Okay? In addition, your patella has nothing to do. I could extend and flex my knee, or I could take a cadaver and flex and extend his knee and remove his patella and still flex and extend his knee. The patella has its own joint called the patellofemoral joint, or the patellofemoral articulation, how the patella literally glides in the groove. Okay? So in terms of the actual knee joint, it's pretty simple. Just these two. Okay? The flexion and the extension should be pretty obvious, get you in the fetal out of fetal. But what I wanted to touch upon today was the one that's not obvious. And that is when the knee is flexed from anatomical. The knee unlocks. This is like some kind of Harry Potter story. If you unlock the whatever, this little golden little ball, a little golden gumball. Golden Stitch or something like that. Stitch. My little sons used to say that all the time. Back to reality. Your knee unlocks when you flex it. When you say, dude, why is it locked when you flex it? Well, your collateral ligaments, MCL, LCL, when your knee is straight or extended or an anatomical, those ligaments are super duper tight, like splints. When you splint something, you don't want it to move. In addition, your condyles screw home into place. They're in a very stable position, called a closed pack position at the ankle. Why would we need that? To save energy. When we're standing up for sometimes hours, conserving energy by letting bone rest on other bone is more efficient than muscles keeping us upright. Okay? So locking, and Campbell's not saying, Campbell said we should lock our knees. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just explaining why we have this position of kind of being locked into place. And that's to have energy conservation when we're standing for long periods of time. Once we unlock that knee, however, our knee allows some rotation. Now, I'm trying not to move my foot, but it's hard. But if you look at this little bump right here, it's called the tibial tuberosity. When I was younger, mine went out like that. They looked like a little Pinocchio nose, and I had surgery on it because my eyes grew slots. But if you look at this little part, that's part of my tibia. And notice how it moves. You see my calf moving. Because if that was all in my foot and my ankle, that stuff wouldn't move. Like you don't see when I do this, right? You may see some skin kind of get stretched or something, but you could literally see my shin do this. Cool? That is knee rotation. And the biggest reason we have it is so that when we do an athletic type of motion, like a cut and a plant, we don't rip our knee out every single time we do it. We have to have a little bit of give. Just like skyscrapers have to have a little bit of give. Just like trees sway and give. Okay? What do we call this rotation? Well, I'm going to define it open chain first, because that's how we define all of our movements at first. It's open chain. It's the distal part moving above the proximal, because that's what's going to happen most of the time. The door will move above the wall most of the time. So when you were in introductory kinesiology classes, it makes total sense why you were taught everything from what's going to move the majority of the time. Okay? All right, Ron, you can do this. This is the lateral part of my leg. This is the medial part of my leg. Last week I touched about why we have that concept is because I can't say the right of my right. This is my right. But the right of my right is the same side as the left of my left. So I don't say the left of my right or the right of my left. We thought rights and left were confusing before. So we have mirrored concepts. Lateral, medial, they are mirroring concepts. My leg's in the mirror and I rub the medial part of my leg. The mirror is going to also rub the medial part of my other leg. Okay? Now, if I ask a child to spin to their right, it's like a dentist. 9 out of 10 dentists recommend. There's always that one. I bet you maybe 10 out of 10 kids that know the difference between their right and their left, and I say spin to your right, are probably going to chase their right arm. Spin to your left. So if I tell my knee, take it off the ground so that it can spin, just like the kid just spun, and say, hey, right knee, spin laterally. Spin to the lateral side. Spin to the outside. Spin externally. Does that make sense? Hey, knee, spin to the inside. Spin medially. Spin internally. It'll all be the same thing. And again, the mirror effect. Let's see if I can get this on camera. This looks really silly. I apologize. Bilaterally. Hey, knees, spin laterally. You're going to see this, like a double door. Both of them are opening, even though they look like they're spinning differently globally. They're doing the exact same thing locally. Spin laterally, wink. Spin medially, yoink. Spin externally, yoink. Spin internally, whoop. External rotation is synonymous with lateral rotation. I like to start off with lateral because it helps explain, hey, spin laterally, just like you'd say spin to your right or spin to your left. So far, so bad? This is where your brain is going to hate yourself. But that's okay, because that's why we're here. Your brain wants to say, okay, Campbell, if you set that law, you set that rule, that my lower leg, my tibia, spins laterally, your brain wants to make it so that anything you spin that way is lateral. And that's not how joint motions work. On the test, Believe me, we are going to work on this more in detail on Wednesday. But this is what's coming. Cut, plant, and your brain is going to want to say, that's medial rotation of the knee, and that is incorrect. This is lateral or external rotation of the knee. From here to there is external or lateral rotation of the knee. And my job on Wednesday is to make sure everybody sees why. That's okay. Start. My patella is lined up with my toes, right? Finish. My patella, which is representing my femur, is not lined up with my toes. How would I have to rotate my knee to go home? Wouldn't I have to medially or internally rotate it to go to where I started? Which shows me I had to externally rotate when I left home. Boink. Start. Finish. That's external rotation. And that's okay, because this to there is the same as that to there. External rotation. Internal rotation. Now there's some other hip stuff going too, but we analyze motion joint by joint. And we can have a hip conversation when we do the hip. But for now, I need to get you guys to see by Wednesday why from here to there is the same as from here to there. I'll leave you with this, because I know some people usually have some questions after class. If somebody comes and passively does this to my knee, I feel a stretch on the inside part of my knee. And likewise, if I cut and plant, this is where I'm going to get, this is where it's going to rip apart. It's in the same place. The same thing is being stretched because the same motions are happening from here to there and from here to there. You see it? Every one of you is going to see it. It's just going to take a little time. It's going to take a little practice. Okay? The reason this is so important for you future athletic trainers, it's so important to try to see mechanisms of injury. You know, what happened? You're detectives. And so we have to see these movements or these motions in the presence of illusions. And listen, this isn't the only time we're going to see this. When we get to the hip, I'm going to teach you and show you how right hip external, hey, right hip spin laterally, is the same as right hip external. We get to the exact same place. From here to there is the same as from here to there. Can you see that? Because if you can see that, then you should be able to see this, because it's the same concept. Happy Monday, everybody. Yeah, have a good day.